Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to the Courtauld. My name is Leila Bambra, and I head up the Research Forum team. And I'm delighted to introduce tonight's event. Tonight will comprise of a conversation between Es Devlin and Ekow Eshun in advance of the opening of Face to Face 50 Encounters with Strangers at Somerset House, which opens this Thursday, the 22nd of November. There will then be time at the end for Q&A, and after that we're inviting you all upstairs for a drink and then the opportunity to also buy catalogue or some of the merchandise which is from Congregation, which was the first part of this project which the Courtauld was involved in. So I'm sure that our guests probably don't need much of an introduction. You probably know everything they've been up to, but for those who aren't sure, I'm going to quickly read out their bios that they sent us. So Es Devlin views an audience as a temporary society and often invites public participation in communal choral works. Her canvas ranges from public sculptures and installations at Tate Modern, V&A, Serpentine, Imperial War Museum and the Lincoln Centre, to kinetic stage designs at the Royal Opera House, the National Theatre and the Metropolitan Opera, as well as Olympic Ceremonies, Super Bowl halftime shows and monumental illuminated stage sculptures for large-scale stadium concerts. She is the subject of an Atlas of Es Devlin, described by Thames and Hudson as the most intricate and sculptural publication to date, and I definitely recommend having a look at it. It's absolutely beautiful. And a retrospective exhibition at the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum in New York in 2023 to 2024. In 2020, she became the first female architect of the pavilion at the World Expo, conceiving a building which used AI to co-author poetry with visitors on its 20-metre diameter facade. Her practice was documented in the 2015 Netflix documentary series Abstract, The Art of Design. She's a Fellow of the Royal Academy of Music, University of the Arts London, and a Royal Designer for Industry at the Royal Society of Arts. She's been awarded the London Design Medal, 3 Olivier Awards, a Tony Award, an Ivor Novello Award, doctorates from the universities of Bristol, Kent and a CBE. So quite a lot there. You
could have done this when we were out there with a cup of tea.
Sorry. Ekow Eshun is a writer and curator. He is chairman of the Fourth Plinth, overseeing Britain's foremost public art programme, and the former director of the Institute of Contemporary Arts, London. Described by Vogue as the most inspired and inspiring curator in Britain, his acclaimed exhibitions include The Black Fantastic at the Hayward Gallery, for which he was awarded the Association for Art History's Curatorial Prize in 2023, and The Time Is Always Now at the National Portrait Gallery, a major study of the black figure and its representation in contemporary art. He's the contributor to publications including The New York Times, Financial Times and The Guardian, and the author of books including Black Gold of the Sun, shortlisted for the Orwell Prize and its exploration of race and identity, and Africa State of Mind, nominated for the Lucy Courtauld Book Prize, and his latest book is The Strangers, 5 Extraordinary Black Men and the Worlds That Made Them. So just before I hand over to our guests, I actually wanted to quickly explain why and how the Courtauld came to be involved in this project, because that might not be necessarily obvious to everyone here. So if you cast your minds back to February, the Courtauld held an exhibition of Frank Auerbach, Charcoal Heads, and this was opposite St Mary le Strand, and this was the site where Congregation would take place. For those of you who don't know, Auerbach arrived in Southampton in 1939 on one of the Kinder transport scheme, and his parents actually died in a German concentration camp 3 years later. So similarly, the ancestors of Samuel Courtauld, who founded the Courtauld, were refugees themselves. They were Huguenot, fleeing persecution in the Catholic France in the 16th century. So when Es viewed Auerbach and started to really think about the similarities between the collections and ways of thinking, she saw the scarred layers of paper, the scored through with patches over time and spaces, and it's these moments where you could really reflect on the tides that have surged for centuries through the Strand throughout the city and in Britain. And the Courtauld itself is a site of art historical learning and inspiration, and it became a really nice collaboration between ourselves and Es. And it was at this stage that we really began to be invested in a project that was dedicated to all who seek sanctuary, actually. and I will allow Es to tell the full story of what came next. But for me, I think, and for a lot of the people at the Courtauld who have been involved in this project, many of us who have family members who sought sanctuary in the UK, these works, which you can see on the screen, are really beautiful, immense stories of human suffering, but also of humans' ability to overcome obstacles. And this exhibition and the next iteration is really a beautiful vision of strength and nobility and love. And in particular, I was really drawn to one of the phrases that the co-authors used as refugees as bringers of gifts. And this project and this collaboration has been something that's brought a lot of gifts to the Courtauld. So I'm really thankful we've been able to have you both here today and that you've all been able to join. So on that note, I will hand it over to you both to get started. So let's give them a round of applause.
Great. Well, let's just, so we're going to sit up front here, because otherwise we have the desk between us, which seems a little bit kind of UN General Assembly style. But just to start with, first of all, thank you all for being here this evening. Es, I want to start with you with your thinking. You understand somewhat what a congregation is, and some of you may have seen the show, but I want to ask, why congregation? Why did you choose to create these portraits, these co-create portraits of 50 people?
So firstly, thanks for coming out on a rainy old night to see us talk. I'm really grateful. But who are the people who wrote to me on DM? There's a couple of people who wrote me DM. Hi, thanks for coming. Is that Tina? Oh, thanks for coming, Tina. Like many things, you try to respond to circumstances and be alive to circumstances and let them teach you what's needed. And this is going to be a bit of a longer answer, but we've got time today. We just did a talk that was only 18 minutes long, so we're a bit like reveling in the fact we don't have to be too brief. So sorry, we're going to go on a bit. Hi everyone. It's a rainy old night. It's all that easy to get to. We haven't done anything yet. We've just been waffling about like our bios and stuff, so you've not missed anything. You have missed the beautiful rendition of our bios and the connection to the portraits. You have missed quite a lot, but you can watch that on the back. Sorry, it was so beautifully done. I didn't mean to say that. 2022 was the origin of this project. I would say sort of briefly. I had been invited to make what was presented to me as a celebration of London. And I said, can I celebrate Londoners who are more than human? And I went to the London Wildlife Trust and I said, how many Londoners are there who are more than human? What number of species are there who call themselves a Londoner? And does anyone know, by the way, how many species there are of Londoners? Have a guess.
50? Thousands.
15,000, but that's if you don't count all the species that are inside each human, of which there are 10,000 in each of us. So just 15,000, not including our biomes. And I said, well, I'm not going to draw 15,000 pictures, but I could maybe do 250 drawings. And I hadn't drawn like that for years, but I asked the London Wildlife Trust which are the 250 most endangered of these London species, because I'd like to pay attention to them while they're with us. And so for 4 months, I made drawings. So I only managed 243 in the end. And it was something that changed me. I am not the same person now as I was at the beginning of 2022. Just the practice of daily observation. And I did it in a humble way. I would just project a photograph of the animal on the wall, draw around it, then stop the projection, then copy it. And I wasn't even trying to express my interpretation of the animal. I was just trying to learn its ways and its forms, find the mathematics that connected the bifurcation of the veins in my drawing hand to the veins on that bat's wing or that leaf, find the continuity between me and the other London species. While that was happening, 2022 was unfolding and the Ukraine war happened, and I remarked that we as a town, city, country, community were becoming more porous to refugees from Ukraine. And this was something I thought that I hadn't felt before in my lifetime. This porosity, this opening of arms, churches, schools, houses. And at the same time, the discourse around people arriving on boats from different countries was getting ever more virulent. And I wanted to try and understand those structures of separation and otherness that pertain to some people seeking refuge in this country and not to others. And it seemed to me the best way to start to understand them was to seek them in myself. But I didn't know any more than that. I didn't know that I was going to do pictures. And then, as Leila said, I was oddly just invited to look at the collection of Lucian Freud sketchbooks at the National Portrait Gallery, and it was the same week as I came to see the Frank Halbach, the extraordinary Frank Halbach exhibition, which was a life-changing show, I would say. And of course, Lucian Freud was a refugee, so was Frank Halbach, and they seemed to me to have both dedicated every single moment that they had. In fact, I asked Frank if he would sit for me for this work, and he wrote me the most beautiful letter. He said, "Please excuse me, I don't know how many years I have left, and I have to spend every minute of them working, so I don't have time to sit for you, sorry." Which in the end, of course, the right move. But it seemed to me what they were recording was the traces of time that the light sat on the faces of their sitters. They were just recording the time and traces. And I started to just be in love with the idea of doing that. So that's what led to the idea of making portraits. And then what you'll see actually, if you come, it opens on Thursday night. It will be open to the public from Friday afternoon, Saturday, till 12th of January. And it's in the west wing of the Somerset House next to the ice rink. And it's a copy of my studio where these rooms were, where these drawings were made. And it's also a recreation of the installation made in St Mary le Strand church. And yeah, it's projection mapped, and each of the co-authors tell a bit of their story, and they each hold a gift. It struck me when I sat in St Mary le Strand church, I knew that the word refugee didn't sit well with me, but I didn't know why. I often have a distaste towards certain bits of language. I just don't like them. And then I have to figure out and dig out and understand why I don't like them. And I thought, what could I offer as a different word? And when I sat in the church, I thought of the three kings, the Magi bringing gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And I thought, what if we just consider not what people are coming to take, but what they're bringing, what they bring. So as each person arrived at my door, I would hear a knock on the door, and I only knew their first name. I made a point of being willfully ignorant. Sometimes some of these people are quite celebrated, quite famous people. So I had to sort of ride through that slight affront that I hadn't read their bio, but I said, no, the point is that I want to draw my suppositions, overlays, presumptions, unconscious biases, what I overlay, what stands between me and truly drawing you. So I would look into the person's eyes. Sorry, I picked you. For 45 minutes. And I said to them, please just hold my gaze. And we had a piece of Max Richter music on, which we timed the drawing because it got to a particular place at 44 minutes. And we draw without me knowing anything about the person. And then at the end of that 45 minutes, then we stopped. And then they would tell me their story. And then I changed everything in the drawing machine, or I carried on with it. And I then educated myself. I had a lot of self-education to do. I drew people from 28 different countries. So I listened to hours, probably about 200 hours of podcasts about 28 different countries while I was finishing the drawings. So that was quite a long answer. Before Ekow asks me another question, we've got a bit of a parallel line of inquiry that while I've been seeing these slides, drawing these portraits of strangers, Ekow's been writing the most extraordinary book I have read in a very long time, which is called The Strangers, in which he has been, I would say, walking in the footsteps of 5 people who probably were strangers to you at one point, probably aren't now. But I would really love to invite Ekow to read a portion of this book so that we can just sort of hold it between us and bring it into this conversation.
Yeah, thank you very much, yes. As I was saying, we've been in a conversation for some time now, which kind of began through this work. And I published a new book quite recently called Strangers. It takes the lives of 5 different black men at different points in history, really to consider the experience of blackness and being, the experience of being othered, the experience of being made strange. I'm going to read the beginning of that, I'm going to read the foreword to it, because actually it explains the book easier than me going through that. So this is the foreword to the book. I'm not going to stand over there. Is that right, Storm? Good.
I was wondering how you were going to jump.
No, the end of
I was going to dive in and offer to hold it for you.
This is the solution. Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of pages. Is that okay? Good. I'm going to read a couple of pages. This is really the opening forward to The Strangers. The Strangers is a book about the lives of 5 remarkable black men. Ira Aldridge, Matthew Henson, Frantz Fanon, Malcolm X, and Justine Fashanu. 5 men of varied character and outlook who lived in different places at different times. Some of them are well known today, their legacies closely studied. Others have largely been overlooked by history. Famous or forgotten, a thread runs between them. Each was, in his own way, a pioneer, embodying and enacting striking change in his respective field and in society at large. Each was a traveller, and at one point or another, an exile, a figure in motion through a world that regarded him as alien. Each strove to reach beyond the constraints of race to assert himself as fully human, fully alive. In telling the stories of these men, I haven't attempted to give a complete account of their lives. Instead, I focused on a period in time when each figure stands at a crossroads, grappling with the signal anxieties and ambitions of his era, alongside his own personal dilemmas. The structure of my narrative has been guided by the factual details of each man's biography, but I've also given myself license to conjure what the often limited archive cannot supply, the tone and texture of their inner lives. Toni Morrison said that black people are spoken of and written about as objects of history, not subjects within it. In The Strangers, I seek to do the opposite, to move from looking at the black male figure to seeing as him. Through storytelling that intertwines the documentary and the imaginary, I aim to reach a deeper emotional truth than fact alone can offer, in order to create an intimate, effective portrait of each man. To do justice to these individual stories, it also felt important to evoke the dense web of black diasporic history, culture and politics within which they stand. So the book also features a second strand, a series of short but expansive essays that counterpoint the character-driven main chapters. These essays range much more widely across place and era than the character chapters, introducing a broad cast of artists and writers travellers and tricksters, seers and superheroes, and through them, tracing the development of my own thinking on blackness and masculinity. This densely constellated and more than factual approach to personal histories seems especially fitting, given that the enterprise of simply being a black man, moving through a white world, frequently takes the individual beyond the everyday into a charged space of performance, fantasy, and myth. The stories and stereotypes that frequently characterize black men as brutish or lawless are as well worn and persistent as the fantastical idea of race itself, a socially constructed fiction without any basis in scientific fact, but one which nevertheless shapes how we see the world. Each black man is the heir to this legacy of caricature, which renders him simultaneously invisible and hypervisible. His existence is inextricably entangled with his representation in popular culture and the white imaginary. To live in such a state involves sustained impositions of one's personhood, from minor daily slights to heightened threats to your freedom and your life itself. It constitutes a feat of self-authorship under intensely hostile conditions, which remains, to my mind, inherently heroic. Thank you.
And actually, I really strongly recommend everyone immediately gets this book and reads it, because literally, if you read all the things that it's not just me saying this. I've never seen a litany of praise for any book like this. But I would say, having read your book you wrote 20 years ago, Black Gold in the Sun, which I equally recommend, it seems, although there was a 20-year gap between those two books, it's a continuous batch of poems. It's a continuous, what Yeats called the rag and bone show of the heart, didn't it? It feels like that. You're still in that same rag and bone shop of the heart. To me, it seems, especially in those more discursive essays. And I wanted to ask you, before you ask me, because we might fling this back at each other, how have you changed? What have you learned about yourself through this?
That's a really good question. I mean, in a way, I think this is really you go into something with an idea. You go into something needing to explore, but you don't anticipate. Well, you have an idea of what you're trying to find, but you don't necessarily anticipate what will happen to you through that search and through that journey. So I wrote, as Ed said, I wrote a previous book to this called Black Gold in the Sun 20 years ago, which is a memoir. And that took me to some places. And it turned out I never stopped searching from then onwards, because I didn't get to the end of that process with that book. And so actually, Writing the Strangers 20 years later, in a way, yeah, I'm still exploring similar territories, but the thing it leaves you with, I tell you what, it leaves you slightly more interesting. It leaves you, let's say, more vulnerable. The act of writing, maybe the act of making art, is an interesting thing in as much as I find that trying to find a way to be honest with myself through that process, to not be seduced by fine words or filigree ideas or something, trying to get to emotional truth. In this respect, I was also minded to try and do right by these figures that I was describing as well. And that process, you get to the end of that, you feel slightly stripped bare as a consequence. It feels like you have one less layer of skin as a consequence. And that's not such a bad feeling. It's a little bit odd because you don't, it turns out it doesn't come back in the same way. This is the thing, it's like, in a way you're prepared for this thing when you put down something, you finished it, now you finished it, you feel a bit odd, and then you get back to life. Well, no, the life you're in now continues at a different pace, a different tempo, a different frequency, a different set of resistance to the natural world around you, to the wind and the rain, to how all of these form, to how you perceive these. And this isn't, I'm not trying to conjure myself heroic here, just to say that the necessary process of exploration is also one of self-revealing. And who wants to go back after that? Standing with the sense of yourself that you discovered through that. It maybe changes you a little bit. Maybe changes me a little bit. I think it does. So I'm not quite the same person. But then also, realizing you're not also at the end either. Realize there's yet more. Because if you can get that far, maybe you can still keep going. So let me ask you. Congregation, face to face, with a gathering of strangers, and an unmaking of strangeness, where it's a proposition of kinship for those who know. How much of this, how much in all of these portraits, how much of you is there? How much does this process, does this collective artwork, to these portraits, how much do they reveal about you?
Thank you for returning the questions. I knew you might. I just was getting there. Interestingly, I was thinking about how many portraits I've done until this moment. I'm 53 years old. I reckon if I gather together, because I'm not someone who draws portraits all the time at all, I do like rock and roll concerts and things, and installations and various other bits and pieces, but it's not what I do all the time. I think if I gathered together every portrait I'd ever made in the first 53 years of my life, there'd probably be about 50 of them. And probably 15 of them were not of my family or my friends, close friends. That's to say, about 15 of them probably didn't have the same skin colour as me, probably didn't come from a similar context to me. So that was the first 50 years. So to then, within the space of 4 months, to encounter a sustained degree, a stranger. And this project was set up very specifically with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees UK. The architecture of it was safe for the person who'd walked into my door. So they either had a safeguarder with them or they felt safe to come on their own. But they knew that the architecture of the project was secure for them, and I knew it was secure for me, and that's very unusual. Anytime I drew a stranger when I was a student, I'd be sitting, maybe like some video on the tube, and I'd be just drawing, and then when the person turned around, I'd quickly put it away. Because I thought, oh God, what if they were offended by what I've drawn or something, so I was going to see. And so this then intense process of meeting 50 strangers and encountering them, in each one, I was scared, I was fearful, I was really nervous to offend. I was really nervous that I would directly overlay my features onto their features in any way. I was anxious, and I sort of described it as layers of static interference between me and the other. So in each case, I had to meet myself really, and learn things about myself that I didn't know. I'll give a couple of concrete examples. The last lady who came in, I had by then finished nearly 50 portraits, finished 49 of them, and 2 of the women who came into my room were from Rwanda. And because I'd nearly finished their portraits, I listened to in total about 6 hours of podcasts about the history of Rwanda, and therefore a lot of those hours were about the history of the genocide in Rwanda. And it had taken me back to Belgian eugenicists in the 1930s who were disinterring skulls and using calipers to measure distances between eyes and lengths of noses, and to therefore determine how to divide a people into Hutu, Tutsi and Twa. And from those roots of separation came one of the most abhorrent nadairs of human behaviour that one could possibly hear podcasted, I would say. And having just listened to all of that, in came this lady. And I thought she looked a bit like one of my ladies who came from Rwanda. And I thought, I must not think that. I must dispel this thought, because I don't know anything about this lady yet. I'm just going to draw her. And I remarked that when you are drawing, you are necessarily calibrating. It's what you're doing. You're not using a caliper, but you are calibrating. Just in a practical way. I'm going, how far out are your eyes? How is it? I'm just figuring it out. But I felt really anxious about what was going through my mind. And then I finished the drawing, great relief. We got to minute 44 of Max's music. I was like, thank God for that. Stopped. And I said, tell me your story. And she said, well, I'm her mum. I'm her sister. I said, okay. So the drawing knew. But I wouldn't let myself know, because I was too busy worrying about what I was projecting, the layers, the feedback loops. And yeah, there were a number of circumstances like that. So what did how did I change? I guess I would now know a little bit more about how to put in place behaviours and practices in myself. I'll tell you one more actually, because concrete examples are helpful here. The lady who I've been meeting with, who works for the United Nations High Commission for Refugees in London, a girl called Sarah, been working with her for about 18 months. And finally we came up with the idea we're going to do these portraits. And I said, look, I need 50 people. You find me 50 people. She said, well, I'll go first. I said, okay, I've known you for a year and a half. You never told me you were a refugee. She said, yeah, my name's not Sarah either. I was like, we've been hanging out. Now you tell me. And I said, don't tell me anymore. I'm going to draw you without knowing anymore, so we'll be strangers. So she sat down. And at that point, she was the first one. I hadn't actually had the idea of this, how this gift was going to work out. And as soon as she sat down, she was sort of faffing about with her hands, and I didn't know how to sit her. I just grabbed a box. And it was actually a box that had an award that I'd been given by some Geneva Opera thingy. I just give the award out. I said, have this box. This will be our box. And she sat, I drew her. And I realised all my assumptions about this young woman were, she's very beautiful. I had assumed she was either Mediterranean, Middle Eastern. I thought she was very posh. I had her down as Kensington, elegant, she's a very beautiful woman. I just had her down as privileged, elegant, out of my league. I thought, if I'd been in the playground with this kid, I wouldn't have had a chance. I just thought she was mesmerising, posh, beautiful, refined. And she is all those things. She's just all those things, and she happens to be an Iranian refugee who came here when she was 17, told by her family they were coming for a trip. And then it turned out that her mother is an activist, and her mother's colleagues, one was in prison, one was killed, and she was told, we're taking refuge here now. She had just one back. She left all her friends and she's been here. She said, I've been here 30 years. I love it, but I still feel like a guest, she said. Not everybody said that. I think the biggest thing I learned was how to hold, and actually your quote from Tina Count in the essay might be worth reading here, how to hold two things at once, which we must often do, I think. And in this case, when you hear the particular stories we've chosen, because we've been quite, Ekow curated the work, he's been constantly the sounding board for his work throughout, and carefully choosing phrases that, as you hear this 10-minute sequence of voices, little fragments from each story, but the final voices are full of pride. I would say even patriotic pride. There's a man called Luka who came from Bosnia, and he remembers when he was 7 being on a cargo plane, and he said, I was fainting, but I got off, and he kept saying how lucky he was. He kept saying, I'm so lucky, and I said, what should I paint inside your box, your gift? He said, paint a Union Jack. He said, I'm so proud to be British. He said, I love everything to do with every civic behaviour. He said, I pay my taxes with a smile. And then Dame Stephanie Shirley, who came on the kinder transport, she said those 2 days when I was 6 years old on that train defined everything that I ever did since. And she's now a hugely successful $1 billion worth company, Dame. And she said something so moving. She said, I love this country with a passion that only someone who's lost their human rights can feel. And when you watch this, and a lot of people when they came out of watching the work in the church, and inshallah, same thing will happen when they're at Somerset House, a lot of people came out and they were crying, but they weren't crying out of pity. They were crying because they felt this combination of pride. They were proud, I think, to be part of this community of extraordinary, magnificent, resilient, powerful people. They were proud to call themselves Londoners if this is what London is. And yet, they felt, I think, this undertow of grief that it took these words to make them feel that pride. And I think that's the main thing that I've learned. I feel a renewed sense of pride, a renewed sense of who my community is and therefore who I am, and how to hold pride and grief at once.
I mean, we should talk about timing for a moment, because I think it's interesting. I think this is really testament to you as an artist. You talk about the gestation of this coming through kind of Ukrainian people's right here, the outbreak of war, but the launch of this project took place really around the same time, just after the riots that took place across Britain, well, it was this summer. This question then of being a stranger, being another, and how we regard that, what it takes to look face to face into what we might describe as an other, turns out to have roots that we can look at historically, but also to be prescient as a topic, in that you started this project way before anyone anticipated those riots taking place. But the currency, the urgency of these questions feels absolutely current. I mean, it's hard to say, I suppose, and you've talked about where this comes from. Do you feel you were trying to explore something that sat within, whatever we call it, our culture, our society, and just trying to get to the deeper sense of where some of this impulse to look face to face into someone's eyes might have come from for you?
It was interesting because Ed and I were meeting when I approached him and said, would you curate the work? Having been sort of blown away by, I think, two of the most important shows I've seen, It's the Black Fantastic at the Hewitt, and Reframing the Black Figure, which is now on in Philadelphia, actually. And you opened it the minute after the big girl standing on the steps. When you said about timing just now, I thought you were worried about our timing. Where are we now at timing? Oh, you've got a clock going on.
Yeah, I said where I'm looking at the clock.
So we started, did we want to stop quite soon? Did we?
Yeah, you might have questions about 5 minutes.
Okay, oh, we've got this all in hand. So I had a sense that there would, well, we all thought, didn't we, there was going to be an election in November. So I thought October would be a heightened moment of toxic discourse around stop the boats and invasions on the coast and all of that. So that's what I thought we were getting in the throes of. But of course we had the election, and then we had people as young as 12 trying to burn down hostels in which people who'd just undergone some of the most horrific journeys you can imagine were sleeping in. And then of course we had this moment of people in Walthamstow, Hastings, Brighton, lots of other areas coming out saying, this is us, refugees are welcome here, on their signs. And Sadiq Khan came to the opening of this work, and his colleagues had said to me, do you want to give him some speaking notes? I said, I really want him to just look at the work and shoot from the hip, and just say what he thinks. And he was crying. Because as you know, Sadiq Khan is the most guarded man the most physically, soldierly guarded man in England. I believe he's got 15 armed guards, because there's such a concern for his safety. And he came out and he said, I've seen all these pop shows and stuff she's done, but this is the first time that has made me cry. And he thought it was a letter to and from London. So I made, I guess, was it pressing? Those horses ran down the street. Vida and Loka, was it Loki? Vida?
Yeah, I think it was Loki. Yeah.
Vida was one of them. Do you remember the white horse covered in blood and the black horse? And we were actually, Ekow and I were meeting to talk about this project. We were in 180 Strand at Reference Point Bookshop. And it was only when we came out, I texted Ekow, I was like, did you see while we were meeting? And I think there's something about those type of images. And it comes back to what I was saying earlier on, just being alive to what any given situation might mean to you and therefore to the rest of the community. And I guess instead of saying those bigoted, racist people over there, which didn't seem to be very helpful, I wanted to say, I must find that element in me. And if I can find whatever bit of it is there, my friend Chrissy actually, who was watching our talk the other day, she gave me a few notes on it because I had used the word racist about myself. She said, you shouldn't say that, you should say unconscious bias. She gave me some lessons on that. She said, people might misinterpret you if you say you're racist. I said, well, whatever word we use, what I'm trying to say is whatever structures are at work in the world that I do not like and want to change, step one is to recognise how participant and complicit, even if it's to a tiny degree, I am in them myself. And then I can be of service. If I just go, oh, them people over there who I'm not voting for, we get nowhere.
Yeah, I think when you first started talking to me about the project, the thing I was most interested in was, okay, look, the congregation, the first iteration of this isn't a church. But in a way, what's the physical, yes, it's the church, but how are these people being framed? I was really interested in this question. What happens if you take 50 faces, 50 people, 50 lives, you set them together? Yes, that, but what else? What else? How do we go beyond simply looking at these figures, to be with them? This seems to be the challenge of the project. And actually, I'm going to go to questions in a minute, but I want to think about two things at the same time. So, you stage this project in church. It has the capacity to move people to tears. because people are in proximity with the lived experience and the spoken testimony of those figures. And the experience is not one of sorrow per se, but actually of survival, livelihood, aliveness, becoming as fully alive as one might possibly try and find a way towards. Interested in your skill as an artist in terms of creating that moment, but then also how you think about creating intimacy at scale, because whereas working with church, you also work in these vast scale arenas as well, where in a way the same questions or the same necessities have to come into play with a group of people that are gathered. There's a search and there's a desire for meaning, for sharing, for connection. I just wonder how what you learn in one space maybe plays into this other space.
Well, I think we will get on to questions in a minute, so I'll try and give a quick version of a long answer, because I think it's worth it maybe. So the work that I do in stadia and arena is often large-scale concerts. There's in this slideshow, there's just one there, which you see a large image of, you'll see it there, you would have seen it about 8 times already, probably. A large image of lots of animals in the sphere, which is 18,000 people in an arena which has the biggest screen that's been built, a big spherical concert hall. And really, that's, I'd say, the latest step in the development of an art form called the pop concert. And it's quite a young one, in that it only really started in 1965, whereas the origins of theatre might be said to be, certainly in Western tradition, the Greeks. There are theatrical traditions from many other aspects of the globe that predate that, of course. But the pop concert, you could say, has its origins in 4 men from Liverpool who felt a particular degree of pain, joy, lived experience, observed experience. They came together, they made music about it, it touched the world. Obviously, they were the Beatles, and they met intimately, I would say, a community around America through a new invention at the time, which was the TV. So there were these little TVs in every living room around America, and a lot of young women and others are encountering the intimacy of a lived piece of experience through the poetry of a Beatles song. And when they had a ticket to Shea Stadium, which was the first ever stadium concert in 1965, they think they're buying a ticket to that. They think they're going to encounter this intimacy that they feel when they're sitting over the TV. And of course they don't. They get there and it's a shit show, because there's no invention of an art form to hold that yet. There's nothing there to hold it. There's literally no amplification, no proper speakers, no video relay. You know, the hundreds of thousands of people couldn't see the Beatles. They couldn't hear them. The Beatles weren't safe, and it was a riot, and it fell apart. And almost that's only 1965. So since then, it's been a process gradually of trying to create an art form that can take the intimacy of lived experience that informs the poetry of song lyrics and broadcast it to the back of the stadium. I'm sorry, I should have done a short answer, but we should probably do our questions.
Okay, let's go to questions, because so many questions. Yes, lady in the front. Yes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation. And it's just that it is my project. I want to, my question is related to my project and that nobody asked for. Well, I'm just doing it on my own. The start of this project was one question: where are you from? And I listen to that question every day. I'm a so-called international student, and during the seminar, it was a seminar about imperialism, and the professor told us like, I want to know about your background and what you studied before, and everybody was naturally talking about where they're from. Like, I'm from Hong Kong, I'm from where, something like that. And I thought it was a bit ironic in a imperialist. Maybe I had some kind of hostility. So I asked them like, where do you think I am from? And they were all like, whoa. We don't guess. We are not doing that in this class. We are not guessing. So, and I was like, it's just the air froze. And I was like, oh, maybe there is something in that question. There's something in that where are you from question. And Chandra Tapad Mohanty talked about what's home got to do with it. And I think about that every day. I'm not saying that is a very bad question or that is a racist question or something like that. I'm just saying, what do you think is in it? Like, in that question, where are you from? Wow.
Yeah. It's a good question to ask. It's a question that we've talked about. It's a question that I think about a great deal. As we've been saying, I wrote a book a while ago called Black Hole in the Sun. It's a memoir. The first line in that book is, where are you from? Because it's a question that has many shades or tones to it, depending who's asking it and depending the intent involved in that. It could be a question of kinship. It could be a question of othering. It can be, is it, well, now here's the question. Is it ever a benign question? A benign and innocent and unreflected question? I actually don't know on that basis. But it's one question that if you do not look like someone who's asking that question, it can come at you. And it can come at you with a sudden violence. But also, and at points in the past I used to find it very painful or used to get kind of angry. But what I've also realised now is that this is also the route towards kinship. So now if I'm travelling somewhere, I might ask someone else who is also not visibly anyway, not from there. I might ask them also this question, and we end up exchanging stories about how we arrived in this place at this time. Sometimes often as an Uber driver, and it's a journey. And I don't mean that to talk about hierarchies of power, but because you're in a shared space together for a while. So you end up having this conversation. And I end up asking them about, how is it here in this place, wherever this place is? And I'm kind of interested because trying to get to this, the understanding we have as people from is that here is not a neutral place. Here is not the normal and universal. Here is also a contingent territory. And in a way, this then becomes a kind of affirming thing for us, that we get to be the people that interrogate this space, that ask this question, not just where you're from, but how is it here? What is it like? All the things that go unspoken, unsaid, unseen by those people who are from here, we get to look at. So to that extent, where are you from is also then an invitation into inquiry, into discovery, into, I think, something that surprisingly privileges us as the people who can see further and see beneath the surface. So it's a good question.
I did once witness Ekow give a rather immediately brilliant answer to that question. We sat down at a dinner and someone said, so where are you from? And he said, I think you mean, who am I? More questions?
Hello. Thank you so much for that. That was incredible. And also thank you so much for the first part of the congregation. It was absolutely amazing. And I wanted to ask more about that kind of specifically, if that's okay. I mean, the curation and then the actual installation and everything. Did you know that the church was the site from the very beginning that you were going to occupy with this installation, one? And then two, did you know all of the elements? Because I never experienced an installation that had so many like singing elements that came together in such a way. The kind of the video, the sound, the way that the light played, all of it was beautiful. And did you have an understanding of that ahead of time, or was it as you'd worked on the drawings, did the other bits then come out of that?
It's a really, really lovely question, and thank you. Thanks for enjoying the work. No, I didn't. It literally, my friend Lindsay Turner, who's a wonderful theatre director, said something about me which I really hold. I hold these words because they help me. She said, as this process is both forensic and associative, and I really found that useful, and I try and be that. And I was, like I say, at the front back, and I was looking at the Lucian Freud, and I was cycling along the Strand to get to Moorgate, which is where the UNHCR office is. And I would have cycled past the church, but I'd always looked at that church and it had always drawn me, and especially as it got liberated, because you know it used to be called St Mary le Way by the bus drivers, because it was in the way. And it had this great liberation, but COVID happened, and I didn't think there had been a beautiful sound installation, but they hadn't done too much to celebrate the unstranding of it. But when we came up with the idea of portraits, I didn't have any idea beyond that, just portraits. And actually, the first drawings I did, there's a drawing you'll see at Somerset House, you know the one on the wall of my dad? And he's sitting on a chair like this. And I was going to have each person sitting there, holding a box, and you were going to individually walk up to each person and meet them face to face like I had, on your own. I hadn't thought of the tiered congregation idea. So the first drawings I did, and I thought about doing it somewhere on the South Bank, because I had made the previous work outside Tate Modern, and I was thinking about somewhere that convened, that was outdoors. Then I started, in fact, I had been given the idea of that church by the London Design Biennale director, Ben Evans, a long time ago. He had said to me, you should think about the commission for 50 churches, because after the Great Fire of London in 1666, Queen Anne, in the early 1700s, commissioned 50 new churches to replace the ones that burnt down. But she only built 12, and this was the first one. And that's why the number 50 came to play, because I think a lot about churches. I was looking actually in the Courtauld collection. There's a drawing looking back, I think it's a Canaletta, is it? He's here. He looks back across the river and he draws this rather kind of fantastical version of London with all these spires rising. And they're all kind of antennae to something greater than us. Whatever you want to call it, it was an aspiration to convene at the top of these spires. And I thought, well, maybe this is church. It's not buildings. It's not 50 buildings. It's 50 individual cosmoses in each of these humans. And maybe that's it. Maybe we can do what she didn't do in slate and stone. We can do in gouache, projected light. And then once I'd started to sit in the church, the church demanded certain things. I find that spaces, I work in space quite specifically for 30 years, is what I've been doing really. And spaces ask things, like when I walk home in my house at night, the space asks me 3 questions. It's like, is that light on? Is that rug there? Really specific. Maybe many of you like that. I think it's quite common. And this church, in fact, Ekow, when I took you in it, you slightly, your body did something weird when we walked in. You kind of went like that, you bristled. Taking my friend Devlin, who came with us to Charleston, he bristled. I took 3 kind of canaries into the coal mine, and they all bristled. And I went like that, and I thought, oh, this space is not going to work when it's, just to be brutally honest, in such a state of uncertainty about how to find a portal to a force greater than yourself. We need to destabilise the architecture of the room a bit.
Yeah.
And there's a very focused altar, a big blue stained glass window, and it seemed to me that whatever I was going to do in that room would only work if the room became complicit in the work and wasn't. It's not that we did an exhibition in the church, it's that we turned that architecture into a vessel to hold the experiences and stories of these people. So it was a feedback loop of need between the moment, the time, my need, and the need of that building, and the need of that street, which is all an ancient ley line. That line has been a migratory route. Eko's wrote a brilliant essay about this, which I strongly urge you to have a look at. It's on the site, I think, on the website, and it's in a book. And since 1893, this has been along the edge of the river. There's a migratory artery and a processional route from east to west. So, what was the second question?
No, that was the second
Oh,
question.
yes.
The first question was how, you basically answered it. It was essentially just how fundamental was the church to
Good.
Okay, so thank you so much for your conversation. And I have a question to ask as an artist. So you made paintings of people you didn't know, strangers. So my question is, if you were asked to draw 30 portraits of strangers versus people you know versus self-portraits, 30 of them, which task would be the most difficult for you and why?
Oh, that's a juicy question. Myself, definitely the hardest, right? Especially 30 times.
Why?
I'd have to, yeah, I mean, I think Ekow actually expressed it very eloquently when he talked about peeling off layers of one's own certainty about oneself, one's own assumptions, one's own skin effect. And I think if you were to do that truthfully, and actually try and go further with each drawing, you would, maybe I'll try and do it.
Let's try one from the back, yeah. Yes.
I didn't see your exhibition at church. I'm raised a Catholic son, but I have my reservations about religious buildings. I'm also visual, I'm an artist, and religion, it says, especially Christianity, it says, you don't know what God looks like and so on. But when you go into the majority of churches, all the gods look white and Italian, right? So my brother got married at the Vatican in the chapel. The Vatican, I'm not very proud, and I was at the Vatican. I was at the Sistine Chapel. And I've looked up, right, and looked around, because it's the first time in that. I'm trying to find a representation of me as, a black man from the Caribbean, from St Lucia. I'm born in St Lucia, but lucky enough to be living here. My mum was born here, and that's my migration story, not as a refugee, but my mum was born here, I've come here. And I came here very young, so I'm supposed to feel like, well, I do feel very, very lucky in a way. I heard you say that, right? But I also feel like a canary in a coal mine, right? Because going into such a, to be in England or in London, and to be in such a broad church, right? I feel like a dying canary at times, okay? And I do get, I sense that your exhibition is about the positivity of, being a refugee in this country and so on. And as a migrant, to this country, I'm very grateful. But I'm wondering about what I find really powerful about what you've done is just this representation in a church, because I think perhaps in that church is probably one of the few places you would ever see a broad church of people, and a representation, you know. So I just want to congratulate you on that, right? But I also want to temper that with, as much as I am, you know, happy to be here and raising a family here, right? It's obviously, you know, to be also made to you feel like you have to be grateful as well, right? I think that needs to be represented, and I'm just voicing that as well, right? I know I might get ejected from here, right? But I just wanted to get your thoughts on perhaps your aim on this, right? And also with Ekow, I've heard of your work, and it's strange I'm going to read everything now that you've done, right? Okay. And I also just, from the black male perspective, right? You know, I'm also touched by your eloquent, you know, explanation of your own experience, which I can obviously relate to. Right? So I'm perhaps not asking you a question, right? I'm just, you know, thanking you both really, for, you know, your contribution. Really.
Thank you so much for everything you just said. You covered a lot of points, and I just want to respond to a couple. One of the phrases, because the work when we showed at St Mary le Strand had extracts from 10 of the stories that I was told. Partly because I didn't have the understanding yet of how this was going to play, and I wanted to craft something quite carefully and quite specifically, so I started with 10. Now that I have an understanding, we've now added 34 voices. One of them is a man called Amir Nizar Zouabi. You may know his work. He's a Palestinian theatre director and artist, and there's a giant puppet called Little Amal that goes around. That's his work, and he's a really brilliant man, and he's really eloquent. And the clip that we put in from him says, I love London, I've been here, you know, making my work. He said, you know, I have a really complex relationship with this magnificent city. That is, of course, the place where so many lines were drawn in the sand that has led to the pain of my people. So it's absolutely not one-sided in its approach, and it's certainly knowing of the complicity of London in the devastation of so many places, which has led to these migrations often in those cases.
I just want to say that I personally, I actually feel entitled here, because I think it's a reverse psychology of being here, right, in this country, where it's like, hang on a second, you're making me feel like I'm a guest here, but I built this. Yeah. So why am I a guest in something I built? Yeah.
That deserves a round of applause.
I think also there was a question from the UNHCR who you know, had put a project together and met everywhere. And they said, oh, can we put a donation ask? You know, obviously UNHCR is a charity, it needs donation. And I said, look, when you do a play, each scene makes the audience feel, each beat in each scene, we divide scenes into beats, and each beat in each scene is devised, carefully crafted to make an audience, or to invite an audience to a certain place. And a piece of work can choose to craft itself. We can choose to craft a piece of work to make an audience feel a certain way. In this case, looking at work that I'd seen about this community, the notes that I'd seen crafted and sounded were often about an invitation to pity and mercy. And those were not notes in this case, for this piece of work, that I wanted to sound so much. It was not my experience of the people I met. My experience was every time a new person came in, it went through my head. If I were hosting a gathering at my house and this person walked in the room, I'd be like, thank God, at least there's one cool person here. You know, literally does. You know, when you think, when I would love to turn up your house show, at least one of the people I really want to see is here. That might be a weird way of putting it, but I wanted to recreate that beat. There are many other beats I could have sounded, but that was that. And just to your point about the churchiness of it, I too was raised a Catholic. And there's many useful things about, you know, having listened to that Latin again and again, you get used to the idea of ritual, you get used to the purpose of gathering in ritual and repetition. And those things I have found can be transferred and translated into other modes that I have found more conducive. Have we got some more questions? There we are.
You've got time for one more question. Go, gentlemen.
I was intrigued by the objects that your portraits were holding, and it just by weird coincidence, I was studying the work last night of Lydia Clark from
I'm
Brazil.
obsessed with Lydia Clark and Lydia Clark.
Oh, you are?
Yeah, obsessed.
Well, then you can probably answer my question then, which is in her history, she kind of started with the objects, if I've got this right, and the interaction of, and she did a piece of work called Bishops, which was animals, I think it was, or critters, and that was, I see your cat up there now, but or a cat.
It's my cat.
But you started your talk from wildlife, I think, or more or less. So I just wondered how, and then she ended up in art therapy at the end. And so I was just curious if any elements of that are reflected in your entry.
I'm so touched that you bring up Lydia Clark, such an important artist. And I would say that definitely there's, you know, a direct influence of her practice on mine in so many pieces. The boxes themselves, each person when they sat down, I said, look, I'm going to ask you, have a think, you've got 45 minutes to make yourself feel less uncomfortable while we're just looking at each other. Have a think about what you want in this box. And, you know, the word gift, as you said, it's quite charged. You know, you shouldn't be expecting anyone to talk about what they bring. I said, you can interpret this word in any way you want. It can be an expression of your, you know, essence or something literal, whatever you want. There's a million ways, but I just want you to co-author this bit with me. You're going to author your story. You're going to tell me your story. You'll be the author of that, clearly, but also this piece of work. So I got a list of things. Someone said they wanted a bowl of borscht, a lady who'd opened a Ukrainian restaurant. She wanted beetroot soup. Someone wanted the spirit of their sister who had passed away 21 days before the sitting. Somebody wanted a book. Somebody wanted their mum and dad. Somebody wanted an aeroplane. A particular plant. There were a lot of plants. Some animals and a lot of plants. All sorts of things. And I had to find a way to turn that into light, into stained glass windows, really. My practice when I was a teenager, that was my job, because I gathered broken bits of stained glass window, probably going back to the church days, and I welded them together so that they were there. What's normally in the church is a big, heavy, dark blue stained glass window. And this, as you've seen in some of those drawings, is a collective, pieced together, luminous, collective stained glass window. I would say that's what went into it.
Yeah, I think that's our time.
Thank you so much.
I was just going to say, if anyone would like to join us in the common room upstairs, there's some drinks being served. But thank you both again. Another round of applause. Thank you.